Elevator maintenance workers. What is the weirdest thing that you have found at the bottom of the elevator chamber? Did home repair to help put myself through college. Got a call that there's a non-waste water leak in an apartment in the second floor bathroom from a landlord. So me and my coworker go over. The water line on the toilet has a leak. Enough has come out that we need to remove some of the ceiling in the living room to replace it. So we cut out a 4x4 area that meets a ceiling joist, and we find an egg. One single egg balanced on the ceiling joist. We gingerly removed it and tossed it out. The ceiling had been closed up for at least the last 40 years. It was lath and plaster, that old, and that egg still haunts me. And now we'll never know, because you tossed it out, you silly goose. Oh, maybe it was a silly goose. Story 2. I used to live in the basement apartment of a house that the owners lived upstairs. They'd built the basement first, worked on the upstairs, and when the upstairs was complete enough to live in, they moved upstairs, and me and my roommates rented the basement. The rent was discounted because we also helped work on the house. So I did stuff like help re-side the house, install floor tile, and I also grouted the kitchen, etc. This is when I was a lot younger and that kind of thing seemed like a sweet deal. Anyways, the owners had practiced some of their reno skills fixing up parts of the basement before they did their work for real upstairs. So there were some definite janky bits of the downstairs, but my roommates and I were all 18, 19, 20 ages, so we took that kind of thing for granted. One morning, one of my roommates was showering, and then there was a kind of slow crashing sound, and then he bellowed, "Oh my gosh, what the?" And then he started retching. The ceiling above the shower, which the owners had fixed up before we moved in, had given way and fallen down on him in the shower. Bad enough, what with the plaster and sheetrock bits and tufts of insulation, but we also discovered something really important that day, which was this. Any piece of the upstairs floor that had pipe joints or anything like that in it, basically anything that was getting closed up last by the subfloor, instead of sweeping up the construction trash and putting it in the bin outside, they just swept all the construction trash into the floor and nailed the subfloor down on top of it. Also, the owners had a dog that wasn't very housebroken. He pooped in the house basically all the time. Why pick up dog poop and throw it away when you were already sweeping stuff into the floor? So my other roommate and I burst into the bathroom to see a 6'4" naked man standing in a pile of wreckage. Shower still gamely streaming over everything, eyes screwed shut in horror, bits of trash, dog poop, and plaster stuck all over his body. Alternatively yelling, "I'm going to kill them!" and retching. He was afraid to move because of all the nails and screws, and also basically because he was blind without his glasses. Story 3. My dad has a great story about this. He supervised the mechanics, and one of them called him from a mental hospital and said, "You've got to see this." The maintenance guy was called because the elevator wasn't quite sitting level on the ground floor. It was about half an inch too high, and both patients and staff had been tripping on it, but all the other floors were no problem. My dad arrived to find the maintenance guy cackling, looking into the bottom of the shaft. There were probably tens of thousands of magazines down there. They had to get a bunch of shovels, a small crew, and a rolling dumpster to clear it out. When it was all done, my dad decided to stay behind and pretend to read a newspaper while he sat in the lobby. After about half an hour, he sees an elderly patient holding a magazine, shuffling slowly toward the elevator. He stops in front of the door, glances left, glances right, and quickly stoops down, slides the magazine into the gap, and shuffles away as fast as he can with a huge grin on his face. My dad could not help but laugh hysterically. This guy had probably been sliding magazines in there multiple times per day, every day, for decades. I should ask him whether he reported it or let the guy have his fun. Wouldn't surprise me if my dad went with the latter. Story 4. My dad was an elevator mechanic for about 15 years. He had a very dark sense of humor and would come home with some of the craziest stories. For example, anytime he was in an elevator, he would shake it a little or tap on the displays or the buttons and go, yep, total piece of crap, inferior piece of garbage. And I think he mostly did it to freak people out. Here's one of my favorites. He got a call that someone was hearing weird noises from the elevator. He got inside, rode the elevator up, and sure enough, he could hear it too. For half a second, he thought it was a baby crying, and he realized it was a cat. When he got to a certain floor, he could hear the sad meowing. It obviously wasn't in the elevator car, so he got into the shaft. and found this little orange kitty. It had somehow, and I don't think he figured out how or told us how, got into the elevator shaft and was sitting in a spot between the floors where it wouldn't get crushed by the elevator, but it couldn't get out. My dad saved it and gave it to the building manager to see if it belonged to anyone in the building. It was the one time he ever told us a story that involved him saving an animal instead of finding dead ones. Story 5. Been in the game 12 years now. Found a full Christmas tree last month. Other finds? 5K and 20s. Big butt bag full of drugs. Roughly 5 kilograms of brand new shoes by the box load. And a severed finger. So some backstory. Christmas tree was found this year on a council estate in August. Photos were taken for the office as it was rather amusing. I visit this lift every month. The money and drugs were found in the same lift shift about 3 months apart, 7 years ago. The money was split between me and my engineer, as I was an apprentice at the time, and the drugs we handed into security. The shoes were found on a passenger and staff lift out of the back of JD Sports. Suspected a staff member was sticking them down there and loading into a car at the end of his shift. Police were involved in this one. The finger was found in a very expensive apartment building. We're talking 50 floors and $1 million apartments. Again, police and EMG services involved in this one. Story 6. One time we were doing a rip-out at an old factory. They were gutting them and turning them into luxury apartments. The elevator we were taking out was a crappy old freight that hadn't run in years. When we finally ran it up, we went down to inspect the pit. It smelled like a dead body had chilled there for half a century. The bottom floor wasn't lit, so I shined my flashlight under the elevator, and the whole floor started moving. Roaches. So nasty. Haven't really found anything fun, though. I've cleaned out more pits that I could count, too. I gave my mom a cheap ring I found a pair of underwear at a hotel, a full packet at a courthouse of some lady's case transcribed. Oh, I was on a mod once, and one of the hoistway doors had an advertisement sticker for a tennis restringing service, which was weird because it was somewhere only an elevator guy should be able to reach. I called the number, but it was out of service. I also found some cool graffiti from the 40s, and that's really about it. I worked on escalators for a year and a half. There was a lot more in those pits. I was taking home bent-up quarters every day. There were lots of shoe bits, and I was always nervous of coming across used needles in certain units. Oh, dude, all those bugs. That would be awful. It's like something straight out of the Magnus archives. Story 7. I used to work at an old 22-story building that had the first automated elevator system in our state. The idea was, in order to control the flow of people in the lobby, you'd push the button for your floor, and the elevator would tell you which one to get on. The elevators would make sure the crowd spread out over the big lobby. Anyway, it was the first time I'd ever seen the auto-open eyes used. I worked on the executive floor, where long-winded executives would often stop me as I was leaving. I got used to passing my hand through the doors to break the eye and hold the doors open. You guessed it, my left hand didn't trip the eye. The doors closed on my hand, which prevented it from closing completely because of my heavy engagement in wedding rings. Crushed the whole mess and lost a 2-carat diamond 22 stories below. My hand was only bruised. Thank God for a safety shutoff. I like to think that someday someone will find a tiny treasure. That's like that new trend, have you guys seen, where people try to stop the elevator door as nonchalantly as possible? And that's cool and all, but, some of these aren't maintained properly, and there's been a few rough injuries. Story 8. I work full-time maintenance at a university that has many elevators throughout the various buildings. In the 6 years I have been at the school, I have checked elevator shafts and found many things. But most interesting to me is that people will drop their stuff down there and just abandon it. Entire wallets, more cell phones than you might think, cash, books, etc. I can't recall one particular item standing out, but they can't all have been dropped unknowingly. Which means there are people who just consider it gone forever? My department will get calls to stop an elevator to retrieve an item, but it really isn't a big deal. But without fail, there will be other equally important items with a layer of dust on it in the pit also. Campus PD does their best to get that stuff back to the owner, but inevitably some goes into lost and found, never to be claimed. I have a friend on the force who has confirmed to me that many things are never claimed. Kind of a long, uneventful answer, I know, but you seemed really interested, so I thought I should share my elevator experience with you. I'll let you know if I find something like a handgun or just a hand. Story 9. Here's the obligatory, I'm not one of the elevator maintenance folk story. But my dad had a Razor phone back when they were still cool. just to annoy him. My mom changed the ringtone to the sound of a meowing cat. My dad absolutely hated it, but he never did change it. Anyway, one day at work, he's getting out of the elevator and accidentally drops his phone into the crack between the elevator car and the doors. He calls maintenance and asks them if they can get his phone back. They say, "Sorry, we can't do that." So he's standing outside the elevator thinking of what to do, and he gets an idea. Running into a nearby office, he asks a coworker if he can use their desk phone for a second, and proceeds to call his own phone. He does this a few times. A couple minutes later, someone else hysterically phones security saying there's a cat stuck in the elevator shaft. A few other people in the elevator at the time corroborate this story, so the elevator maintenance folk run the elevator up the shaft and shine some light down there. Meanwhile, my dad and some other people are standing by the open doors to the shaft, looking downwards. My dad says, no, I don't see the cat, but I think I see my phone down there. Could you guys just grab that for me?" And then they do. 3 million IQ by that guy. Story 10. I'm not an elevator maintenance person, but I have been in dozens of elevator shafts for work. I'm a bomb tech, and I was in the Army. I did a lot of POTUS and VIP missions in conjunction with the Secret Service. They don't have a bomb squad, so they steal us. It's a great gig. You get to travel all over and stay in some insanely nice hotels. Anyway, the elevator shafts must be cleared to ensure that they need to be checked out. I've done a fair amount of elevator surfing, which is riding on top of the car. The weirdest and funniest thing I've seen was a 12-inch, around that height, Superman figurine that had its feet glued to the top of the elevator. The head was slightly tilted back, and the arms were pointed forward, so it appeared like Superman was flying up, and away whenever the elevator was in use. I have a picture of it saved on an external hard drive somewhere. That crap was hilarious. Story 11. The company where I worked had an old heavy-duty freight elevator that was semi-abandoned. It was more like an automotive lift with giant pistons embedded in the ground, but installed in an elevator shaft. When they needed to move something huge, they would fill the hydraulics with oil. It took hundreds of gallons to top off the system, including the giant pistons, and then they would use it for a day. A few months later, they would try to use it again and find the oil gone. Once they planned to use it the following day, so maintenance pumped in the oil to get ready. The next day, no oil. They refilled it in the morning of the move and got one lift out of it before it stopped. The company knew it was spilling hydraulic oil into the ground under the plant and just did not give a crap. They finally abandoned it for good when the maintenance guys threatened to report the illegal oil dumping. Story 12. It sounds like it's not as uncommon as I thought for people to find money, keys, and other esoterica, and I'm glad I'm not alone in my findings. But I guarantee no one's found what I came across. In the courthouse of my hometown, which has an elevator for mobility-impaired visitors, I was asked to take a look at a mechanism after a particularly violent tantrum following a not-desired verdict that rendered the elevator unsafe. I was rooting around the detritus while clearing it away. I came across a thin folder containing what appeared to be some key witness statements. I didn't take a closer look for legal reasons, of course, and I decided to track down the legal personnel who they belonged to. Turned out, they were still practicing law in my hometown, so I made an appointment to hand them over. When I did, the lawyer expressed surprise over what I had found because they related to a crucial case that had held in 1998, when Undertaker threw mankind off the cell and plummeted 16 feet through the announcer's table. What a twist. By God, that man had a family! Story 13. Not an elevator tech, but we were running a warrant at a horrible multi-story building that had been essentially abandoned by the owners. We knew the top floor had been riddled with access ways between many of the old apartments by kicking through the drywall. Essentially, most of the top floor was a single super apartment. We knew the elevator was out, so we hit the stairs as soon as we pulled up. The building was abandoned to the point of smelling bad, but we knew there were squatters that lived here. It wasn't a huge haul up, but running stairs with all your gear isn't exactly a vacation. We got to the top floor and started working on containment. Within a minute or two, we heard calls of "Contact!" behind us, followed by the yells for someone to get on the ground. The floor was quickly secured with no injuries, which is a good day. Rounding back to the entry hallway, we learned that our suspect had kicked down the drywall opposite the elevator and thrown some bundles down the elevator shaft before he was taken into custody. A quick conversation, asking the folks on the ground floor to pop the elevator doors and see what was there. Horrible idea. Within seconds, a scream, "Stop! No!" was heard up the stairwell. The ground floor of the elevator was completely filled with crap as part of the ceiling from the elevator had caved in, and the cast-off of humanity was seeping in. We rapidly learned that it was even worse for the second floor as it was almost filled to the top. Yeah, the abandoned building had a trash chute in the form of a broken elevator shaft. All kinds of crap, dirty diapers, a dead cat, syringes, garbage bags, garbage out of bags, little fluffs of toilet paper with nasty streaks on them, broken glass, and a curious amount of broken bottles that all seemed to be filled with a golden yellow liquid. It was all horrible, a damp, disgusting mess. I had to rope down from the top, not too many floors, to take possession of the bundles that were thrown down. Thankfully, all were on top. I stupidly thought that this wouldn't be that big of a deal, and then I started my descent. If I screwed up my rope down, I was going to bounce off tetanus incarnate, laced with used hypodermic needles and human excrement. I probably should have found a better way, but this idiot was already descending. It turns out they were really all the way on top. Steady hands locked the line, and I was able to stretch and reach the bundles. The gang then hooked on the line and helped angle me to a safe exit. Story 14. Years ago, I was on maybe week 2 or 3 of my first big boy job after college. I worked accounts payable for a large healthcare company, and we were positioned on the 18th floor of our building, which happened to be the executive level, only because there was no other place to put our small AP department. Being the peon I was in charge of making the trek down to the post office every day and getting the business mail. On one particular day, I forgot my work lanyard, which held my door pass and all my work keys at home, so I borrowed one of our vice president's keys to get the mail with. The time came and I walked to the elevator, and right as it opened, I somehow fumbled the keys and they fell perfectly down into the seam on the floor. I could hear them clicking and clanking all the way down to the ground level. Took a week to get the elevator maintenance people out there, as this wasn't an emergency. That is 1 week that I thought I was surely being fired. The VP hated me from then on, but we just didn't talk. I never got let go for it. Being an AP, I received and coded the bill from the elevator people. It was around $1,000 for someone to open the ground floor door and get the keys. I have no idea why they never took that out of my paycheck. Story 15. Oh, I've got one that's relevant. My great-uncle was a truck driver years back. It wasn't uncommon in those days that people would try to steal things from his truck. One day, some mafia guys walked up to the cab, held him at gunpoint, and told him to get down. They brought him up on the roof and gave him a bag. They said someone is watching him. Someone will come to pick up the bag. When they do, you can go home. If you look in the bag, the scout will shoot. He sat up there for 2 hours, but nobody came. He opened the bag, and there was a sandwich and a soda inside. So he ate the sandwich and walked home. They stole the truck, and it was recovered abandoned. A few months later, the same thing happened. This time they brought him into an abandoned building. When they got there, he said he didn't care about the truck, but trying to make light of things, he asked if they had another sandwich. Then they threw him down an elevator shaft in the abandoned building. He broke both legs. Fortunately, not long afterwards, a cop was passing by and heard him screaming. He quit driving trucks after that.
I'm gonna make you an offer you can't refuse.
Gravity. Poor guy. Story 16. Okay, I know this might be effed up, but when I lived in an apartment building with an elevator, I would often leave things in the elevator shaft just to mess with the maintenance guy. It started because I knew he was superstitious and paranoid, and he had been a total jerk to my female roommate and asked her for an alternative payment in exchange for him fixing our fireplace. So, yeah, I used to leave things just to mess with him around the apartment complex. In the elevator shaft, I left a pentagram circled by candles, and in the middle of it, I put a porcelain doll and 2 knives I'd used to clean chickens and deer so they still had blood on them. Beneath the stairs on the first floor, there was an empty space that he would store tools behind a metal door. In the far back corner, behind tools he rarely moved, I put a small mattress and some old Polaroids I bought at an estate sale. I scratched out the eyes and the faces on some of them, so he thought someone was living under the stairs. On the roof of the building by the AC units, I left a copy of the Satanic Bible that I got from some girl I met on Tinder I admittedly slept with. She tried to convert me, but I was perfectly happy with a non-believer in all things. So the story the maintenance guy told our landlord was that there was a satanic witch squatting under the stairs and performing rituals and practicing witchcraft in the elevator shaft. I moved out with my girlfriend soon after that, but my old roommate said she heard from the landlord that the maintenance guy moved out of the building, and the landlord figured out it was me shortly after I moved out. The landlord thought it was hilarious.